Quick disclaimer before I get into the video, I just wanted to let you guys know that my audio ends up being a little bit behind my video throughout the entirety of the podcast. My guest's audio is fine, their video is fine, so shout out to her. But yeah, I just wanted to let you guys know it is my first ever online interview with another person, so I'm still ironing things out. But this conversation was too good for me to just completely delete the entire episode. I thought it was good enough to just put it out as is, so I'm sorry about that. I know it would bother me if I was watching it, so I just wanted to give a quick disclaimer. It's my first ever episode, so give me some leeway when it comes to this interviewing thing, and we're going to get better going into the future, but thank you for watching anyway. Welcome to another episode of the Paycheck podcast. I am your host, Justice, I used to be Pay, and today we have our first ever guest. We got Claudia here from one of the most well-known rap labels in the game right now, QC. She's here to give her insight on the music business and just talk about some things all around regarding music. So how are you doing today, Claudia?
I'm good. Thank you for having me. This is my first time ever doing something like this, like a podcast. So I'm really excited to be here.
Yeah, we are very appreciative of having you on as our first guest. You know, we've been looking to start interviews for a while now, so I appreciate you joining. And I'm just going to start off with, an easy question. So for some people who may not really know or may not be too well informed, what exactly is an AR and what is your kind of goal?
Yeah, so A&R stands for Artist and Repertoire, and there are so many different like responsibilities that come with being an A&R. And so kind of like the first one and I guess like the flashy one that people like to, think about is discovering artists and signing them to the label. From there, the A&R is really like the point of contact for the artist, but more specifically relating to creating the music. So setting up studio sessions, with different producers, writers, really developing the artist. Additionally, from there, there's a lot of A&R admin work. So even just like releasing a record, there's a lot that needs to happen on the back end with, you know, legal and reaching out to producers and getting samples cleared and so that's just kind of, at least I would say, like the baseline. But a lot of times A&Rs, a good A&R is taking on a lot of different roles because if you are the one that's in charge of putting together the music, in most cases A&Rs might have some marketing plans or have ideas for the music videos. So there are different types of A&Rs. Because there are specifically A&R admins who just handle the admin stuff. There's A&R people who are really just focused on developing artists. Then there's A&R research people, which is a bit more of like what I do, which is just discovering. And then there are people who do a little bit of everything. So that's the easiest way to answer that question.
Okay, cool. And so what would you say, like, made you get into the profession in the first place? Because there's not a lot of people who have jobs in the music industry, especially a job like an A&R.
Yeah. So this is a really good question. I love talking about this because specifically in the music industry, there's no one way to get started. And I think unlike other industries where, um, maybe you go through like a more like corporate environment, um, there's no right way to get your foot in the door. So for me personally, I was always just a big fan of music, I mean, I just like loved it. And when I went to college, I went to Emory, I was in Atlanta, and I had a friend who I really like, credit him for showing me the ropes and bringing me into the industry. He would come down to Atlanta. He was working at Alamo Records at the time, and he would come down to Atlanta and be with his artist who was Lil Got It. And I was in college, so I would go to sessions with them, or I remember I went to like a show, like a Comethazine show. This is back in 2019. And so when I graduated from college, I asked for an internship. So it was an unpaid internship. Luckily, I'm from New York, so I was able to live at home and I would go into the Alamo office every day and I would intern. And so when I was interning, I knew I wanted to work in the music industry. I didn't really know what I wanted. I found that Alamo had a really great A&R team, but specifically, I thought I could really help out with the research stuff. Specifically, this is around the time when like TikTok is really starting to take off.
Okay.
Lil Nas X and Old Town Road. So I was like, okay, I'm gonna just make TikTok like my thing. And that's actually how I found you and how we
Yeah.
initially connected. So yeah, I really kind of just found a place for me to fit in and I just got really good at like this one skill and one thing led to another. Once my foot was in the door, got a job, moved around a bit. So yeah, that's how I got my start.
Okay, and so the way you explained it was kind of like, you were just in college doing your thing and it kind of just happened and you got more into it over time. So would you say that growing up, you ever saw yourself like getting into the music industry? And if you didn't, were you a big music or hip hop fan growing up as a kid?
Yeah, I definitely was a huge fan, specifically a hip hop fan. I mean, like when I graduated high school in 2015. So like, like a lot of Kendrick Lamar, like Cash Money, ASAP Rocky, I'm from New York. Those were some of like, just a few of my favorite things I was listening to at the time. Like in high school, just like what's popular. And then
Yeah.
by the time I got to college, especially being in Atlanta, I was like, this is 2015 Atlanta. Migos is coming up,
Yeah.
Future's coming off a crazy run, like you have Young Thug. So it was like everything was in Atlanta at this time. So I was going to like every single show. I was like waiting on lines. I was like getting everybody's merch, spending like so much money that I
Yeah.
didn't have on like $80 sweatshirts. Um, so yeah, I was like totally obsessed. And the reason I did kind of fall into it, but what had happened was my friend knew I was like a huge like fan, and so when he would come to Atlanta, he was like, "Hey, you should, come around with me." And I think I was so amazed. I was like, "You get paid to do this? Like that is crazy." Obviously, at the time, I was only really seeing like the cool side of it. Like it's not all cool,
Yeah.
but it still is a job. But yeah, I just from then on out, I was like, I have to do this, or at least I have to try because had to at least give it a shot.
Yeah, being in college for those years, those like peak Migo years, and oh man, that
Yeah,
must have been crazy.
it
But
was great.
speaking of, you said you grew up in New York. You don't have to get like too into detail, but like, what would you say that was like growing up as a kid? I'm not really sure where in New York you're from, but you can just give like a little insight into that.
Yeah, I think New York, obviously, not only being like a huge like hub for hip hop, also like a lot of the origins of hip hop come from New York. But even beyond that, just like culturally, there's so much culture in New York. I grew up listening to all different types of music. My grandpa is from Brooklyn, and he's super old now, so not currently,
Okay.
but he was a professional like jazz and classical drummer.
Okay.
So grew up just around a lot of different music and influences, and it just always felt like, for me personally, I enjoyed discovering stuff. And being in New York, it was like you could go to all these like small venues and shows, and everybody would come to New York when they were coming up. So that totally like influenced me. And I think part of why A&R research in particular was such like a perfect role for me is because I always growing up like just loved to be like find an artist before my friends,
Yeah.
like I'm
Yeah.
sure everyone, like especially people who are obsessed with music, it's like, oh, but I put you onto that like
Yeah.
6 months
Yeah.
ago.
Yeah.
So I just became obsessed with that. And yeah, I definitely think New York like influenced a lot of my taste and my aspirations maybe.
Yeah, you spoke on like the music scene in New York and being able to go see these small shows. Me personally, I'm from Arizona, so the music scene out here isn't that strong. There's not a lot of
Right.
stuff going on.
Right.
So I always thought that was really interesting. But it's funny that you said you went to college in Atlanta, and later on down the line you ended up working for QC, which is one of
Yeah.
the most recognizable labels in rap, especially when it comes to the South and Atlanta. So, what would you say that's like working for QC, and how specifically did you end up there from your job at Alamo?
Yeah, so like me being back in Atlanta is like totally, it's not related at all to
Yeah,
my having gone to school there. Um, but obviously when I was presented with the opportunity, I was like so honored, and especially those years where I was in Atlanta, like everything was revolving around QC. So I was such a big Migos fan, especially as well, and Yachty, and
yeah,
also of course Baby and City Girls, and just everything they did. I was like obsessed. So I was completely honored to um have been even like considered for the role. So I'll go back a little bit though. I was at Alamo for actually just under a year. I didn't even spend a full year there because I was interning. And I really wanted to, obviously I needed to get a job.
yeah,
Um, but Alamo really was such a it was the best learning experience. It was really hard, but being an intern, the only way to learn is by just doing it. So I was there and I was like, I'm just gonna do the thing. So learned so much at my time at Alamo. From there, I was offered a job at Sony Music The Orchard. So The Orchard is Sony's, it's a huge distribution company. It's really like a massive global company. And distributors and distro deals, and these are all things like they're very, very, very like prevalent in the music industry. They're huge. Every single song gets released through a distributor. So Orchard was overseeing a lot of global releases, but they had like what's called artist services and label services teams where they're doing like more boutique services and distro deals. So I was hired as an A&R research person on the artist services team where, some of the artists that were coming through at the time were like Baby Keem's first
Okay.
project was released to the Orchard. Thames's first thing was like an EP was released to the Orchard. And a lot of these artists would then upstream to other Sony labels. One of my favorite acts at the time was like Paris, Texas was coming through. So it was really like a boutique, like arm of the company. And I was there for about like 2 years. I think actually like really like 2.5 years. Learned a lot about distribution and deal structure and deal terms and, just like what makes sense in the industry. And from there, I really had been networking a lot. I'd been meeting a lot of people. I really was just, trying to be as early as possible on anything that was going viral on the internet, reaching out to all these artists. And um, I had a lot of friends in the industry, and someone caught wind that QC was looking for an A&R research person, and my name was brought up. So I was reached out to, and I went through, like interviews. I was just meeting with people on the team. Everyone was so cool. I like didn't feel
Okay.
like an interview process at all. And I ended up just getting. I got the job, and this was like 2 years ago now. So
Okay,
I've been at
cool.
QC for 2 years.
That's great. Okay. And so, we hear a lot about QC. We hear about, Baby and Yachty and the City Girls and the Migos and stuff. But one of the most prolific figures of QC is QCP, right? Everyone knows him, everyone knows about him. So, what would you say it's like working underneath him, and how is he just, when the cameras aren't on and you get to really meet him?
Yeah, he is like I feel so honored to be working for him and coach as well.
Yeah.
Like they are like literally the dream team, and I think the thing that is so cool about QC in particular is it's very rare that you have the founders like still currently involved 10, QC hit 10 years last year. To still be so involved with, of course, Yachty and Baby and everything that's happening at the top, but even down to new signings and developing acts, they have relationships with all of our artists, and obviously it looks a little bit different now. They're not running around to studio sessions with all of our
Yeah.
developing acts and stuff. Of course, they have bigger fish to fry, but they are very, very, very present, like more than I've ever seen in any other company. So to just be around that work ethic is like truly inspiring, and seeing what they've built and seeing them continue to just put in the work to continue the legacy. It's really incredible. So I feel very honored to work with them and to learn from them. I've learned so much. But yeah, it's just they're there's a lot to learn from them. They have a world of knowledge. So just even just by being around them, you pick up on little gems and stuff.
Okay, yeah. So, us as fans, and you're obviously on the inside, we see QC kind of like as a family, right? We talk about the QC family all the time. We see the chain get passed out. It's a big deal, right? So, I wanted to know, what was it like for you bringing artists into QC, specifically your artist SCY Jim? I know you post him all the time. What was that like for you? And he's probably one of your most recognizable artists. So, tell us about that situation.
Yeah, so, you know, and this actually is a good segue because I kind of had just with, Coach and P being so involved. So a big part of the process is, so I do a lot of A&R research. So I go out, I try to find stuff. Um, I'm really spending like half of my time probably still doing that. Certain weeks get busy with other things, but I try to maintain a good amount of like research in my daily life. And so obviously, you're not going to find something every single day. But you can discover something. I reach out to an artist. I might have a meeting with them, two meetings, sometimes multiple meetings, specifically with Jim. You know, I was talking to him and his management for probably like 6 months
Oh
before we ended
wow.
up signing. So these things, they don't happen quickly, especially if you are early on an artist, which a lot of research people are. You are kind of, there's so many reasons why it might not be the right time to sign an artist, and we can get into that a little bit. But really, like I said, everything, like coach and PR across everything. So, if there's something I feel strongly about, pitching it to coach and P, seeing, their response. Obviously, sometimes it takes a couple of times. You might have to bring something up a few times. But it's really just like the stars kind of aligning, setting up an in person meeting. Of course, the music is very important, but when you're meeting in person too, it's like, what are we all like? Would we make a good team? Would we, like, connect well together? So, we had a great meeting with Jim. We had a studio session with him in Atlanta. He really liked him. And so, one thing led to another, and we signed a record deal. Um, so yeah, and that, for things that I'm discovering, that process, that's pretty much the process.
Okay. And speaking of like again that family aspect of QC, would you say that most artists end up taking to that pretty well? Because I know it's a thing that a lot of people want to be with QC, but sometimes personalities don't mix very well. But would you say overall that most artists work pretty well with QC?
Yeah, and I think, obviously for so many reasons, artists have schedules and they're busy. It's not like everyone is like hanging around a house together,
Yeah.
necessarily. Like, but it is very, very collaborative. So, like we might put together recording camps where we have a lot of our artists in the same studio at the same time in different rooms. Maybe we have producer camps where we just have producers working on beats for our artists. So there is definitely like a creative effort in bring our artists together and stuff, and they have their own individual relationships. And I just yeah, it's naturally a collaborative company. Even like on the A&R front, we're not that large of an A&R team, and so if someone's working on a project and I'm working on a project, it's like, how can we come together on here? Maybe it's a producer we're both working with, or obviously getting our artists featured on each other's projects. So very, very collaborative. And that also, the family applies to what we're doing on working at the company. So if I have something, or if I have an artist I'm trying to reach, and I don't know so and so, but I know someone else has a connection, we're all working together on just putting out the best stuff possible, I would say.
Okay. And for you as an A&R, what would you say your number one way at the moment is of like finding these new artists?
It is for sure the internet. So I mean, it's the only time I like am finding an artist in person is if I found them on the internet and I go see them at a show
Okay.
or like
Yeah.
in the studio. I'm like not really going to, occasionally, like if I go to like a showcase to see one artist, I might see some other artists on the lineup and you know be impressed. So that has happened before, but for the most part, my screen time is a nightmare. It's Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, SoundCloud. Um, the way I like, kind of my thing is getting the algorithms to just spit out everything at you. So, and you have to kind of work at it. You have to
Yeah.
almost like train the algorithm. So, my TikTok page, I have like three different TikTok pages. And, there's, because there are singers that go viral. There's like, something like Laser Dam and Ian and this
Yeah.
underground stuff. And then, you might have something like, Boss Man D'Lo is going crazy, and that's totally different than the audience that's going to be consuming like Dirtball and, that stuff.
Yeah.
So I have all these different accounts, and I try to like interact with not only artist pages, but maybe influencers that are early on trends. So really just having the algorithm present things before they hit like the mainstream, hopefully. And that goes for YouTube and Instagram as well.
Yeah, so I actually end up with, I don't know, maybe it's just a rap YouTube thing. I end up with a lot of people in my comments like, oh man, I'm gonna be the next big rapper. Make sure to look out for me. So if you guys are watching this, she just said that when she goes to these shows to see other people, sometimes she might end up watching a performance or two that's not the person she went to see. So make sure you're on your P's
Oh
and
yeah.
Q's there. And
Oh yeah.
would you ever say that like you're just scrolling on TikTok or Twitter or whatever, and you just stumble upon an artist like immediately? Has that ever happened to you?
Oh yeah. So it's kind of like some days it's just a total bust, and then some days it's I just feel like, oh my God, I'm getting, every other thing I'm seeing is maybe it's not great, but it's something that I see having potential. So, there's a difference. There's something where it's like, oh my gosh, this is like the best thing ever. And a good research person, I'm not going to like everything that I'm discovering, but I still need to be considering it and looking into it. And it's not just like aimlessly scrolling. There are certain things that I check. I have like literally a list of pages and I add to it that I check weekly, some of them daily. Like different influencers on TikTok will be having like a hot moment where maybe they're like the cyber underground page right now
Yeah.
is one that's super super hot. I check that one every single day. So I think also if you're an artist and you're trying to get discovered, especially by labels, which I will say that should not be your goal, because as an artist, if you're cultivating fans and you're making new fans, the labels are going to find you. So aim for fans and we will find you. So, but there are certain pages where if you're noticing that a page might be getting really good engagement, reaching out to them, building a relationship with some of these pages, because those are things that I also look for in playlists. And there's things, but every day is different. Some days I'm like, oh my gosh, it's so cold right now, and some days I'm like, I'm overwhelmed. There's so many things that could be the next thing, really.
Yeah, and I think that's a good point that you made about trying to build a fan base more than getting immediately signed to a label and trying to reach out to labels.
Yeah.
That's a very good point, because I see a lot of people doing that as well. But
Yeah.
what would you say is typically like your first move when it comes to like reaching out to an artist?
It really depends. I try to, I don't know. I feel like I used to do this thing like when I first got started where like I would send an email or like a DM and be like, "Hello, like my name is da 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 and I'm reaching out from da da da." Now it's just like, "Hey, heard this song, love it." Um, you know, if I feel like it's like really early for the artist, or maybe I'm like, I don't feel like, okay, we need to get on a phone call immediately. I'll just let them know I really like the music. I'll say, "Hey, I'm reaching out from QC." Um, and I don't reach out to any artist that I don't think has like real potential. But then from there, there's a system that is in place. I track a lot of artists weekly. I check out their socials weekly. I don't follow a lot of artists that I'm scouting because that's a big no in a
Okay.
lot of cases. Sometimes I do, um, for random reasons. Maybe I don't know. Sometimes if they ask me and I'm in a good mood, I'll follow them. Like there's different reasons why I might follow an artist, but if I like an artist, I'm not always following them, but I do check their pages on like my burner just to see what are they posting. Because for me, I mentioned this earlier, the big things that I look for really are like, of course, data and numbers are a big part of getting signed. There's no doubting that. But it's really like what the numbers mean. So if you are cultivating a fan base online and you are gaining, it's not even like you need to have 100,000 followers. If you have 2,000 followers, but you're getting 800 likes on a post and you're getting all these comments and you are seeing real fan engagement, that to me is actually way more exciting than somebody with all these followers and like no engagement. So for me, I feel like if you are cultivating that fan base online and I'm seeing that, then from there I'll say, hey, let's get on a phone call, give them my number, and then just give them a call. And I
Okay.
try to keep it very casual.
Okay.
So yeah.
And just to speak on one specific part, you said that like following an artist is typically like a no-no. Why exactly is that? I don't think I've ever heard that before.
Yeah, I mean, people feel differently about it. I just like when I first got started, it was like if you're early in an artist, You don't want to follow them because then other labels will know that
Hmm.
you're interested, or other labels might discover the artist because you followed them.
Okay.
It's you know, to be honest, if something is really going crazy, every label knows about it. So me following the artist isn't really gonna like, give anything away. So yeah, it's just a little, I don't know. Some people are more paranoid than others,
Okay.
honestly, about it.
It's like a
So
little competition thing. Like you don't want to let
it
them know.
totally
Yeah.
is. Oh my
Okay.
God. Yes. Like I think all the research people, we all kind of know each other, and we, know what we're all looking at, and who's in the likes, who's in the comments. It's all part of the game a little bit for
Okay.
sure.
Yeah. I've never really heard that, so I think that's pretty interesting.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
so being an A&R, you obviously have well, I wouldn't say a peek behind, the cover. You're behind the cover at this point. So what would you say is like one of the biggest thing, or maybe a couple of things that you've learned from being an AR about the music industry compared to being a fan?
Mm, it's a good question. I think probably just like understanding now like the amount that goes into even just like releasing a record. I mean, because there's so much that needs to be handled on the back end of just putting out a project, and a lot of it isn't, like kind of mentioned, it's not really like the glamorous stuff, but it's stuff that has to be done. We have deadlines and schedules, and you need to hit algorithm, and it needs to be pitched to playlists, you need to get press on board, you need to make sure the ads are running. Like, there are all these things. You make sure you're in budget, you need to reach out to all the producers and samples and music videos. So there's so much that goes into it. I mean, not that I as a fan ever thought that it was like easy. I guess I just didn't, you just don't realize the amount of like manpower it truly takes to just like put on a project. um that, and also I think that's probably the big one. I think that's probably the big one. And maybe like, having some more insight into like why certain things work and why certain things don't. There's so much more than just, you know, over the years have been like, oh, this artist is so great. I wonder why they never really like, why they weren't able to kind of take it to the next level. When you see kind of the day-to-day ins and outs of things, you kind of just see whether it's on the label or on the artist or on the management or whoever, there's so much that can go wrong, that when everything goes right, it's like pretty rare almost. So yeah, I don't know if that kind of answers the
Yeah, no,
question.
for sure. Because sometimes as a fan, like we just see like, oh, there's a song being dropped, there's a song not being dropped, the album's here, the
Right.
album's not here, there's a tour, there isn't. Like for us,
Right.
it's just kind of very surface level. So I think it's very interesting to really kind of get behind that. And speaking on that, what would you say? I don't know if you have. I don't want to ask you for like an exact number, but like, how many artists do you think you have helped gotten like signed?
It's hard to say over the years because also, working at a distributor, distro deals are usually done very quickly. They're shorter term deals. So probably, I don't know, like 10 maybe?
Okay. Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean that's 10 people whose lives definitely changed. So I mean, hey, that's
Yeah,
yeah.
absolutely. Absolutely.
And
So, and back just quickly on the distro stuff, because it is actually becoming like a very, very popular thing right now in the industry, are doing these like short-term, low-touch distro deals where, labels are able to like invest in artists without necessarily taking on like the huge commitment. And that also goes to the artist side too. A lot of artists, when you're reaching out to them super early, they're not looking to sign a record deal that's gonna, you know, potentially be for their whole career. And so a lot of distro deals are becoming very, very, very popular nowadays and can be done pretty quickly.
yeah, speaking on the distro deals a little bit and how they're becoming more popular, would you also say? I know this is a little off the rip, but would you also say that's possibly due to a lot of the spooky stories about labels now? Everyone's scared of labels and, oh, don't sign, it'll ruin your career. And we got people complaining about their deals all the time. Would you say that that mindset has kind of started to creep into smaller artists when they're on their rise, like, oh, I don't know if I want to do this? Is that like a rising thing?
Yeah, it definitely is. It definitely comes up. I think you hear like the term like, oh, I want to own my masters, or I want to be independent, um, which is totally valid. I think it's so funny though, because it's definitely thrown around a lot more. And I think, signing to a record label for multiple projects with the right team, that's it takes a lot of time to develop and grow an artist. And I think that it makes sense for some artists and it doesn't make sense for other artists. And to me, I think the reason why distro deals have become so popular is two things. I think it's what the first is what you mentioned, kind of maybe record labels having a bad rap and there being a little bit of like the spooks around it. Then the second thing is with A&R research becoming so, every label has research teams now. We are discovering artists so early on in their careers, and artists that have real potential. But these are not artists that, honestly, they should not be signing long-term record deals at the stage in that they're being discovered. I know a lot of them might, see the flash of a record label and they just want to sign, but it's too early for a lot of these artists. They don't have proper management teams. They've never been to studios. They've never, getting into a system where you can't just drop something. Like, especially all these artists are using samples now. If you're signed to a record label, you can't turn around and drop a song with a, top 10 sample on it
Yeah.
from last week, So for a lot of these artists, it makes sense to do distro deals when it's so early. So I think those two things together really are working, to push the distro deal
Okay.
at this moment.
And what would you just say is your favorite part of being an A&R, just in general?
Mm, definitely discovering artists, and I think one thing that I love specifically about discovering artists is not even just like individual artists, but it's like being hip to certain scenes. Like right now, I two regions that I really love. I love what's coming out of like Milwaukee right now and the DMV. Like I think that these are two areas that are really pushing the needle forward. Last year I was like, I mean, I still am like Florida always has some superstar, but last year I was like obsessed with Florida, and now I like, love a lot of things coming out of Milwaukee and DC as I mentioned. So just like being able to discover these trends and these scenes, and then also like tapping in with these artists. And it's not even just artists, sometimes it's videographers, it's cover artists, it's the producers that are literally actually the ones that are creating these sounds. So being able to connect with these people is awesome. And I love talking to people. That's like, very fun for me to just, like I said, get on the phone, talk about it, and you know ultimately doing what I love every day is a blessing for sure.
Yeah, and for anybody out there that's watching that maybe be in your position that you were in when you were first in college and kind of interning and stuff, what would you say is your best advice in terms of like getting into the music industry more on your side of things rather than the musician side?
Yeah, I think the first thing I'll say is if you are given an opportunity such as an internship or anything, just do not let up. Like once you have your foot in the door, you're not going to have many opportunities to get your foot back in the door. So even if it's, you know, I remember we had like at Alamo, like an album release party, and I had to go pick up like the donuts for the party and the liquor. Like just go do it, it's fine. Like
Yeah.
you're sure you're not in the studio, with Rod Wave, but
Yeah.
like that's fine. Like you're not supposed to at that point. So, um, just kill any opportunity that you're given is the first. But then second, I think the music industry is unique and that's very entrepreneurial. So you don't need anyone else's approval to get your foot in the door. You don't necessarily need an internship. You don't need a big label. I used to, when I was interning at Alamo, this is before Alamo was a Sony company. I so badly like wanted to be at a major label. I thought that that was like what you were supposed to do.
Yeah.
But that's not necessary to create a career for yourself in the music industry. There's nothing against that working at a major label at all, obviously, but
Yeah.
there's so many amazing places to work. And what I guess I'm really trying to say is If you would consider yourself an entrepreneur, you can start a podcast, which is yourself.
Yeah.
You can create content. Go find an artist you like. Maybe you can find a producer you like. Start managing them. And a good manager, by the way, doesn't need to know everything. You just need to be passionate and be willing to learn. So go out, create opportunities for yourself, because you can really, create something for yourself in this industry, in a meaningful way. So yeah, that's what I
Okay.
would say.
And you know, a lot of conversations, specifically now, I'm not going to say too many buzzwords, about the music industry seem to be a little bit negative. So, what would you say?
Yeah.
What would you say is like if you could get rid of some things in the music industry, what would that be?
Mm, that's a good question. Oh, like a lot. I mean, I don't know. I think again, like when something is your job, and I did mention, like I am very passionate about like music and my job, and I feel so lucky to have this job and do what I do. But there's a lot of stuff that comes up that of course it's like, oh yeah, this is a job. I think this is more specific to me, but one thing is it actually has unfortunately taken away a little bit of like me just being able to enjoy music sometimes, like being a fan. I feel like sometimes I know too much about maybe, I know someone's manager, or, I just know the story about how that record came together, and it like almost I can't just listen to it as music. It's like I know the people who are
Mm.
associated with it, and it's like I'll listen to a song and I'm thinking of, somebody that I know personally, which is just weird. So there's that. And then I think um it's true for any industry though, which is just, people who don't have the best intentions, especially relating to artists. I think the industry has the potential, to be so glamorous, and people are not in it for the right reasons because of that. So, of course, but you're going to have that in life,
Yeah.
so that's what I would say.
Yeah, it's just it's a little bit of a hectic time right now, but
Oh yeah, and any of that creepy shit too. Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
But luckily I have never ever ever come across anything like that. So I am consuming this information just as everyone else. I have no information on
Yeah,
anything.
yeah,
So
yeah. But I guess segueing off of that, would you? I don't know. I don't think you have any children, but if you did, and they came to you and they said they wanted to be in the music industry as an A&R, what would that be like for you?
actually, you know what I think I would say? Like A&R is a lot of people want to be A&Rs because everyone wants to discover artists and, sign the artist, but I think there's so many cool jobs in the industry that are not A&R roles. And so I would say that, if you have the opportunity to try out different things, um, try out different roles. Maybe it might be a marketing role, maybe it is a management role, maybe you love, certain people love the art of putting together a record. So, maybe you work on the publishing side where you're working with producers and songwriters, and your job is more in development in the studio. So, yeah, that's what I would say. And then I think also um, there are so many instances of there's a few instances of overnight successes, and it's very, very difficult to see those things and feel like, oh, like, why is this not happening for me? And this stuff takes time, there's not everything's going to be overnight.
Yeah,
And so, oh, sorry, I'm getting a call.
no, it's okay.
So I would say, work at it, work every day at it, learn from your mistakes. And yeah, just keep following the stuff that you're passionate about and follow your gut instincts.
Okay. And what about the rapper side of things? Would you be like cool with your kids getting in onto like the rapper side of things more so? Because that's a little bit more volatile. There's ups, there's downs. It's not very consistent unless you're one of the like big dogs.
Yeah, I think being an artist is just, I don't know. Like, I don't plan on having kids anytime soon, but I think if I were to give advice to somebody who wanted to be an artist, first I'd have to hear the music and meet them and be like, "Art, could you actually be an artist?" I think it's just knowing that there unfortunately the being an artist, you need to obviously it's very difficult right now. It is. You know, you need to have your finger on the pulse, but you also can't just follow trends. You need to push trends forward. You need to be creating something new, something profound, I think, to make a dent right now. You know, every single artist that is having a moment, and it does feel like such like a vibrant time. Everyone's doing something different, it feels like. You know, like Atlanta sounds totally different from, I mentioned, like Milwaukee, and what's happening in the tri-state area is like totally different than what's happening in Florida. It's really cool to see all this stuff, but then again, there's a lot of fluff in the middle. And so maybe there are a lot of artists that actually may be better as producers or writers, or you know, taking on different roles. So yeah, but I wouldn't say like just don't do it, but you know, just try to, you know, create a unique lane for yourself, I guess, would be my advice to an artist right now.
Yeah, yeah,
And also cultivate that fan base as
yeah.
well.
Because yeah, there is a lot more room for people to blow up, but I think because there's more room, it may make it to where you might be a little bit more popping than you would be in a regular setting, but that glass ceiling might be a little lower because everything's spread out a little bit more. But I'm gonna get into
Right.
a little bit
Right.
more of like a fan area question, just because I feel like there's some people who would
Sure.
probably want to know. Do you ever get to hang around any of the big QC artists? Like, are you ever around like the Babies, the Yachties, the Migos? Like, are you ever around those guys?
So yes, although, you know, not if there's projects that are being worked on, or, you know, we're all in the same city, specifically like at these camps that I mentioned, yes, definitely. You know, I'm not best friends with everybody, obviously, but yeah, I've definitely been able to spend some time around people that I'm like, this is so cool. Um, so yeah.
Okay, cool. And just for you personally, I know you talked about being into like the DMV scene and stuff like that, but what would you say is probably like who are the artists that you're keeping in your rotation, like your top three artists right now at the moment?
Mm, right now, well, it's very, you know, obviously the future project just came out, so
Yeah,
that's definitely in my rotation. Anything, and like, I might be biased, but anything Yachty and Concrete
yeah.
is definitely in my rotation. Even all the Yachty stuff from last year is still like very, very heavily in my rotation. I listen to a lot of Don Tolliver. He's my number one artist last year. Have to say, of course, the recent Drake stuff, been a big fan. And then maybe some stuff that's like a little bit smaller. I love, you know, I mentioned Concrete. I love Caribou, obviously, and
Yeah.
Nisia as well.
Hmm.
Um, from the DC area, I love KP Skywalker's from the DMV.
Okay.
V's
Yeah.
is my rotation. Um, yeah, I'm trying to think.
Okay.
That's a lot of it. That's a lot of
Yeah,
it.
yeah, that was a lot. And like just so far, what would you say is probably the best album you've heard in 2024?
I have to say, probably We Don't Trust. It's so hard to say.
Yeah.
Like when Metro, it's just like, how can you put anything above that? I love the Yeet project as well.
Yeah, that was different.
Um, so probably those two, I
Okay.
would say. And also like what other projects have really been released? Like big projects that like rap projects been released this year. Um,
And we got the
but I think it's gotta
21.
be We Don't.
Yeah. We Don't
Oh, the
Trust You.
21, of
Yeah.
course. But I wouldn't put 21 above those two that I just
Yeah.
mentioned.
Yeah, I would tend to agree with you there. I think We Don't Trust You is probably the best album I've heard so far this year.
Yeah.
And just to kind of, I guess, cap things off to a certain extent, who is your favorite musician that you've ever worked with?
It's probably any opportunity I get to work with any of the Concrete people. You know, it's not a project, it's not my project by any means, but anytime I get to contribute or help, that is like the coolest to me. I've never been I'm so passionate about what they're doing. I think that they really are like, honestly, like I mentioned, they're creating a totally new wave and scene, and anything I get to do to help there is like, I always am so thrilled.
Yeah, and yeah, I think Concrete's doing something pretty interesting right now. When does their collab project come out? Is it already out or is it next week? I think.
I don't want to be the one to reveal that information. If it's not already out there, I would hate to be the one to
Okay. All right. Well
reveal
then, yeah,
information.
yeah.
But just keep an eye out.
Okay, cool. All right, and I'm gonna just ask one last question because I know you got to go pretty soon. I saw you post the Beyonce album on your story, and then like you tagged one of your friends, and I looked at. Did they have anything to do with that Beyonce project?
Yeah, and actually, like, I think that this is such a cool thing that I did not know about when I first joined the industry. But one of my best friends works in publishing,
Okay.
and she is an A&R, but she A&Rs for writers.
Mm.
So she had two writers that were credited on the Beyonce project.
Oh, okay.
And it is really, really cool. Like, her job is so different from mine, but I love hearing about what she does because she is kind of like I mentioned, her role is more so in literally creating the songs for these hit makers. And so creating camps, I mentioned camps a lot. Camps are like you might have a studio with like 5 rooms in it. And in each room, you have a different set of writers, different set of producers working in each one. So those are things that she's putting together. And so, yeah, so I was just shouting her out because it doesn't get much bigger than Beyonce.
Yeah,
So she killed
that's
it.
yeah, it's the
But
queen. And I don't even like country music, but I definitely did like the album. But I think that's gonna be it for today. I appreciate you for joining the show, and I appreciate you guys for watching.
yeah,
If you made it this far, thank you so much. We'll definitely do this again later on down the line. I appreciate you for joining me. But yeah, I think that's gonna be the end of this episode.
great. Thanks
All
for
right.
having me. Appreciate it.
Yep.